Hello knitting friends. In this video I'm going to show you how you can make plaid on a striped fabric. What I have here is a fabric that I knit with horizontal stripes, and as I was making this fabric I left some divots. I made a purl column here, so essentially I ribbed this piece here. It was stockinette with a little bit of ribbing anywhere that I wanted a vertical line for my plaid, and I then crocheted or embroidered these vertical lines in after. And that's what I'm going to show you today, how to embroider in a vertical line of plaid and how to work surface crochet for your plaid. We'll start with the embroidery, and I'm going to work it right into this ditch. Basically, right here we have a ditch, a purl stitch ditch. Now, if you've already made a project and it's all stockinette stitch and you don't have these little purl divots or purl ditches, that's okay. What will happen is your fabric will spread out if you squeeze in a vertical line between these two stitches. So your tension, your gauge, will probably change on your piece and it will widen. When you plan ahead and create that purl stitch ditch, you set yourself up to have a little bit less spread when you add these vertical lines. The first technique I'd like to show you is embroidery. I'm going to take a generous 3 times the length of the space that I intend to stitch with my yarn. I've threaded that yarn onto the tapestry needle. Then what I'm going to do is locate this column that I intend to stitch in, and with my tapestry needle coming from the back of the work towards the front of the work, I'm going to insert my needle into the very first stitch. So right into the center below the purl bump, my needle comes up. I'm going to leave a little tail here that I'll weave in later. The next step here is to bring my tapestry needle straight down that hole that the yarn came out of. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, Shaina, aren't you going to then pull this yarn straight out? Yes, that would happen if I didn't catch it. So after you have this loop here, right, where you came up the stitch and then back down, after you have this loop, it's a big loop, you're going to then take your tapestry needle and insert it up into the very next stitch. So you'll see I've got my loop coming out right below that purl bump. I'm now going to insert my tapestry needle up, and I'm also going to bring that yarn and the tapestry needle through this big loop. Okay, so as I start to tighten that loop, it catches on the very next row. And then I'm going to repeat that process. So my yarn, my embroidery yarn, is already at the front of the work. I'm going to insert my tapestry needle into the same hole this yarn is coming out of. So actually it's that pink stitch that I just created. My tapestry needle goes down. I'm going to make this loop here. Maybe I'll hold it on my thumb. I'm coming up the very next stitch vertically, and then bringing my needle also through that loop so that when I tighten the loop, it catches on the yarn. So here are the 3 steps a little quicker. With your yarn popping out of the center, stab your needle down into the same spot that the yarn is coming out of. Make sure that loop is sitting straight. Insert the needle up the center of the next stitch and through the loop from back to front, and then you tighten. So you're going down the stitch, keeping that loop large, up the next stitch, and then putting the loop through the yarn, the working yarn. That is how you would embroider this vertical plaid line onto your fabric. Once you're comfortable with that general process, you can speed things up with the embroidery by combining 2 steps into one. What I mean by that is, as I push my needle down here into this same hole that it's coming out of, I'm also going to bring it up the loop that's above and pull through the finished loop. So there's less movement of my hand. I'm going into the stitch. So I'm creating my loop here. I'm going into the stitch, but I'm coming up the next spot and scooping the yarn there, so that in one motion, 2 motions, I can complete the stitch. So it feels a little bit more efficient to work this way. Just to show you what that looks like from the back, each new pass of the stitch comes up here. Here I've run out of yarn, so I'm going to cut a new piece and bring it from the back, from the wrong side to the right side, up in the center of the very last completed loop, and then continue on in the same way that I had been stitching. And then I'll just deal with this tail later by pushing it to the wrong side and weaving it in. That was my last stitch. I'm now going to push my needle to the wrong side of the work, thereby leaving the tail in the back. I'm going to tuck this one in now. Just going to trace along the stitch. That happened at a convenient place by the other pink, so that'll be a little bit easier to weave in my tails, which is fortunate. That's how you work an embroidered vertical line of stitches on your piece to create a plaid. Now I'm going to demonstrate how to work a crocheted vertical line. So this is called surface crochet. I'm going to use this yarn. Surface crochet is essentially a chain stitch that you work with the yarn in the back. So I'm going to use a crochet hook in my right hand. I'm going to hold the yarn in my left hand as I would for crochet. And what I have here is a crochet hook that is the same size in terms of millimeters as the knitting needle that I used to knit my piece. This ensures that we'll have a fairly similar stitch size. Right. So similar sized crochet hook to the knitting needle. You're holding the yarn in the back of the work behind the fabric, so you can't see everything that you're doing. But what you're going to do is we're going to be putting our hook one after another into each of these stitches, into each of these rows. I'm inserting the hook into the first stitch, drawing up a loop from my hand, and bringing that to the front of the fabric. That's our first stitch. We have our first loop there. Then I'm going to insert my hook into the very next hole, wrap the yarn around for crochet, bring that new stitch up, and then slip stitch it right through the previous stitch. So I'm going into the next hole, wrapping my yarn around the hook in the back of the work, bringing that new stitch up, and pulling it through for a slip stitch. So in, wrap, bring your new stitch to the front and through the previous loop. In, wrap in the back for crochet, bring the new loop through to the front and through the previous stitch. In, wrap over, to the front. So I have 2 loops on the hook, and I bring the new loop through the old loop. And occasionally that happens where your finger slips off. I find I use my middle finger a little bit as I'm doing this. So here I kind of hold the yarn with the middle finger to help guide it through. You'll come up with your own special way to hang on to the yarn because it is a little challenging not being able to see where your yarn is. So again, my middle finger is kind of helping keep track of the yarn while my index finger is holding it and helping maintain tension as I typically do when I crochet. But here I'm letting my middle finger kind of do a little wiggling in the back to help maintain my hold on that yarn so I know where it is. So I'm going in, moving my hook in front of the yarn, wrapping, pulling through. So we're chaining right on top of the fabric. And that's how we're getting this same stitch. So in, wrap, bring to this side, and then through. In, wrap, through and through. Wrap, through. So as I come out of the fabric, I'm just going immediately through the loop. That's the shortcut there. Just immediately as you're bringing this new stitch to the front, just pull it right through the loop that had been on the crochet hook. I'm going all the way to the top. Once you've made it to the top of your fabric or where you'd like the line to end, you're going to then fasten off your last stitch, thread the yarn onto your tapestry needle, and push it to the wrong side. And then you can weave in your tails. Here's our completed fabric. It's a little bit heavier than typical fabric would be because you've added all these extra stitches. It's a little wider than a typical fabric would be in the same needle size and stitch count because you've spread apart your stitches just a little bit here. Certainly those divots, those ditches that we made of rib help, but it still expands a little bit. Now, I just want to talk about the pros and cons of each of the techniques that we did here. So with the embroidery technique, the pro of that certainly was that you don't need to know how to crochet. So if you feel uncomfortable holding the crochet hook and the yarn, this is a great way to create these vertical stripes. The drawbacks of this technique are that you often will catch the yarn and create little knots as you're working this needle through, and also you need a finite piece of yarn. You have to cut the yarn a certain length in order to make it all the way up, and as I had to do, you may have to attach a new piece of yarn. With crochet, with the crochet technique, certainly one of the benefits there is that you can use your ball of yarn and not have to cut it until you're finished getting to the top. The drawback, of course, is that it's very hard to see and manage what you're doing with the yarn behind the working with your crochet hook. So if you're not comfortable with crochet, this may be a little tricky to start off with, but it's certainly worth it, in my opinion, to try and learn it. I'm going to quickly weave in the tails so they don't get in my way when I work the next version of the plaid. So to weave in the tails, I'm just zigging and zagging that tail into the embroidered line. If I don't want my fabric getting too thick, I can also work a duplicate stitch weave like this, where I trace along the look of a stitch. And in this case, if you have a very short tail, you can also pre-thread your needle into all of the stitches that you would like it to go through. Then put your yarn through the tapestry needle and bring it through. You can weave in the tails at any time that you feel is convenient for you. If you'd rather wait till the end, or if you have some other fun plan with them, like using them for fringe or something, go for it. Happy knitting! Enjoy your plaid!